tried, I did good. And the second side was very good, why didn't I? But someone connected with me. Mine was wrong. You know. I hate that guy. انا ما امسك شراب والله يلا احسن والله قاعد صحاك حرام here حرام choose the one choose the one
What's wrong? That should calm you down.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's not hungry down, it's muscle weakness.
Okay, well, inshallah today we will finish this. Yes, man. Yeah, Ammar. It's this way, not this way. If you still have a lot of things to say, you know, a coffee shop is right out there. You know, help yourself. If there is a sign-in sheet, sign it and leave. This is, yeah, very good offer, right, someone? Okay, well, inshallah, today we will finish talking about glucocorticoids. Last time when we stopped talking about glucocorticoids, we were we were saying they have the number one effect is gluconeogenesis. They also reduce them, they mobilize proteins in all tissues except the liver. And we also said they mobilize fatty acids. And we said, so now we talked about their metabolic effect. Inshallah, now we will talk about what they do in terms of inflammation, because they're anti-inflammatory. And we said that if you break, I guess, 2 bones in a rat, you will have a significant increase in cortisol in the adrenal cortex as well as in the plasma. But this will happen within minutes or seconds even. So apparently they're involved in they increase under any kind of stress. Well, what are the different types of stresses that you will have a very high concentration of cortisol after? We said trauma of any type, infection, intense heat or cold, which is by itself a kind of stress, injection of norepinephrine, surgery, injection of a necrotizing substance, or restraining an animal. And in short, almost any kind of disease or stress will cause a significant increase in cortisol. Well, now, the next 3 slides, you really don't need to know, yes, but the reasons why we have a significant increase in cortisol under stressful situation is not really very clear. And we know some facts, but we do not understand exactly how is that helpful. So there are some, like I said, the next 3 slides are simply speculation of what might be happening. Remember now, if you mobilize proteins from most of the tissues, that will provide a lot of amino acids in the plasma, and they can be picked up by tissues that might need them more than others. So it is believed that might be one of the effects or benefits of mobilizing proteins or amino acids under stress. And how is that? How would that work? It works by simply, there is preference, even though now we know that the liver increases its amino acid uptake and it synthesizes a lot of proteins that might be needed under stress. But it is believed that other cells might do that, and there is availability of amino acids. And these cells might need to synthesize a specific protein. And we can take an example as the immune cells, for example. They might be required to synthesize a particular protein because whenever you have stress, it's usually as a result of infection or something like that. And it is believed that might be also a reason why you have a significant increase in cortisol. And one of the supporting evidence for such hypotheses is the fact that even though we mobilize proteins from almost all tissues except the liver, but the structural proteins are not mobilized. Okay? And they definitely are needed, especially in neurons or any cells. So these are the last to be mobilized, the structural proteins. So therefore, that's why, at least this is one of the speculations of why we have a significant increase in cortisol as a result of stress. Okay, well, the other thing that we have, there's a chair there. Yeah. The other thing that cortisol does is, as you probably heard, there is a whole group of drugs we call non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and from the name itself you can determine steroids are anti-inflammatory, but they're kind of endogenous, and of course we can synthesize them. So let's talk about the role of cortisol in anti-inflammation. Almost any time you have an infection or a trauma of any kind, it will cause inflammation too. And that's, of course, we know by now, that's when you have a lot of cortisol. And let's understand what is exactly the role of cortisol in anti-inflammation. Well, in order to understand that, let's see what happens during inflammation. Did you take the immunology course? Okay. Well, we will go quickly then over this, but there are about 5 steps, I think, of inflammation. Whenever you have inflammation, the following happens. The damaged cells release chemicals, okay, that usually activate the process of inflammation, and these chemicals, we know many of them, such as histamine, bradykinin, proteolytic enzymes, and a lot of these prostaglandins, leukotrienes, a lot of these are vasodilators themselves too. And not only that, they're vasodilators, but they also can affect the permeability of the capillaries. Usually they increase permeability in the capillaries. You have an increase in blood flow to the affected area, and this is referred to as erythema. Okay, and so therefore you deliver these substances that are stimulated during inflammation. You have leakage of large amounts of practically pure plasma into these areas. And that results from the increase in capillary, like you have a lot of vasodilators on board. And this often, after the, this practically pure plasma leaks into the interstitium, that is followed by a clotting mechanism, whereby you have, over a short period of time, you will have clotting of that area, and that gives you something called non-pitting edema. This is not only fluid, the whole area becomes like a gel, so it's non-pitting in the sense that when you press on it, its shape doesn't come back to what it was right away. And of course, you will have an infiltration, a lot of infiltration of lymphocytes and leukocytes of all kinds to the main macrophages, to the area where you have the infection. After a few days, you even have fibrous tissue growing in that area. So these are usually the 5 different stages or steps of inflammation. Okay, well now, what does cortisol do? Cortisol, if given in large amounts, it will stop that. If it's given before the inflammation process starts, it will stop it while significantly attenuate. And even if it helps, even if you give it after the inflammation process has already begun. Okay. And exactly how does it do that? It does that by almost trying to reverse these 5 steps that we talked about. One of the main effects of cortisol is the stabilization of the lysosomal membranes. Remember, a lot of these leukotrienes, prostaglandins, a lot of these substances, they are usually released from the lysosomes, proteolytic enzymes. So if the membranes of these lysosomes are stabilized, they're going to be delayed while prevented from rupturing. So therefore, a lot of these chemicals that promote the inflammation, that promote inflammation will not be secreted to begin with. So that's one of the main and very well studied effect of cortisol in terms of its anti-inflammatory ability.
Doctor?
Yes.
You mentioned something about infection.
Yes.
If sometimes infection causes inflammation.
Almost all the time, infection or trauma will be
causing inflammation. But how can I resolve inflammation if I don't cure the infection using my immunoglobulin or T or B cells? Because cortisol.
Well, there is a conflict there. Okay. Again, we will get into that. But remember, when you have, there are sometimes, and we will give examples of that. Sometimes the inflammatory response of the body to an infection is more damaging than the infection itself. So when you have, it's not like a zero-sum game or anything like that.
Your immune response is suppressed.
Yes, your immune. If that's what it takes to prevent inflammation, which is more damaging than the immune response itself, then you do that. Okay, and it's like it's a balancing act. You have to see which is more, and choosing one of 2 evils, if you can put it that way. Okay, so cortisol decreases the permeability of the capillaries, so you will not have this extrusion of plasma into the interstitium, and again, that's one of the steps that we have in inflammation. It decreases the migration of blood cells to that area of inflammation, and again, you can see that it's practically interfering with most of the steps. The 5 steps that we talked about that kind of define inflammation. It also diminishes the formation of prostaglandins and leukotrienes, and these are usually vasodilators as well as they help in the inflammation process. What else? Cortisol also suppresses the immune system. That's answering your question, even though you're trying to prevent the inflammation response, but at the same time you're also affecting the immune response. You're reducing that. So it's not like only gain. There is probably some loss of the, the immune system obviously will not be as effective. Now we know, we probably already know that. Cortisols are used for immunosuppression with transplanted patients. And why do we use immunosuppression? And we're trying to suppress the immune system. And if they're being released naturally or endogenously, they will do the same thing. Okay? So again, it depends upon how damaging is the inflammatory response versus the immune response that you need to mount against a particular infection or trauma. Also, cortisol attenuates fever by inhibiting this leukotriene pyrogen that we talked about. It's an interleukin-1, IL-1, which is a pyrogen. You remember what the pyrogen is?
Fever is causing.
Causes fever. Usually it's bacteria or part of bacteria, but we also have an endogenous pyrogen, which is interleukin-1. So if you depress the release of that, that means you're not going to have fever. This is a pyrogen. If you reduce its amount, that means it's not going to change the set